everybody. So glad you could join us. Welcome to the Far West Systems Management User Group Cloud Imaging Day. I am your host, Amy Arwoodmark. I am joined by two very shiny geeks. I am joined by Johan Arwoodmark and Michael Nystrom. Say hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Johan and I are in our home office, and we have some very interesting decor. So everyone who looks at Johan gets to see my unicorns, and everyone who looks at me gets to see Johan's Star Wars stuff. So unfortunately for all of you, Johan's doing the presenting, so you'll do a lot of looking at unicorns, and Michael has very shiny green screen. I'm not sure if he'll project anything, but nope, you get green and you get unicorns. Okay?
Yeah, the thing is that you don't want to see what's on the other side. That's the reason.
Yeah.
All right.
So we do have a packed event for you today. We will have our first session with our technical drill down on cloud imaging. There will be a break, and then we'll do a deep dive for MDT and PowerShell, another break, and then cloud imaging via Config Manager. Next, some housekeeping. In the world of 2020, I need to remind you that the sessions are being recorded. Anything you say and do is preserved in time for all of eternity. I assume that you participating in this session means that you agree to be recorded, and if you don't, then please hang up now. Please don't be a bully. Don't be rude or anything like that. If you have questions, you can ask them in the question and answer box. You can also ask them via Twitter. You can email. You should all have my email address because it sent out a reminder and a confirmation and stuff like that. So we're happy to answer questions or any complaints that you may have. Just please be respectful. We have had to remove people in the past, and it's something that we won't tolerate at all. Again, there is a question and answer box, but the limitation of this platform is that the questions go to me, the host, and then I pass them on to Michael and Johan. So while we do want you to ask questions in real time, know that I will not interrupt them unless it's like an urgent question, but I will pass them off, and as they have a little bit of a break, then they'll start answering those questions. Unless it's something really simple that I can answer, then I'll answer in real time. If you would like to tweet about the event, please use the hashtag FWSMUG, which is just the initials of our user group. And now I'm going to stop sharing my webcam so you can start looking at Johan's unicorns, and I will pass it off to Johan and Michael. So please enjoy the event.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks everyone for joining. As you might have seen on Twitter, we are actually at full capacity for this user group meeting, 5,000 people, and for that we are super excited. It's in the record for us, and just so cool. All right. However, these events cannot happen without our sponsors, so I would like to say a very special thanks, not for that one, but come on, you. Tupan Software for providing resources, hardware, and time to help us do these magical things around cloud imaging. Thank you, Mirrors, which is a company that Amy founded that is paying for the GoToWebinar platform that we're using for this week. And of course, the TrueSec for Michael's sense and the time he has been able to spend on countless of days and nights and weekends and whatnot regarding to getting these platforms up and running and working. And it's been I'll say interesting 2 years now. We've been playing around with this fun stuff. And of course, we have some small announcements before we get going. We do have more information, more trainings available on the VM Monster website. We just published all the training dates for 2021 if you want to attend any of our classes. We have Deployment Academy coming up in late December, going over to next year. And finally, if you need help, don't hesitate to contact us. This is what we do for a living, and we'll be happy to help you out. And you can basically book us through any of these organizations that was mentioned, but let's do if you need help. All right. This is the final one. We absolutely love questions. Keep them coming, and Amy will help moderating them, and we will answer them. Any thoughts, Michael? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get to it.
I'm going to interject while you're setting up for the session. There's a lot of comments about Johan's microphone. We're very sorry. We know we're trying to fix it as we're going. But if something's unclear, you can just say, hey, that wasn't clear. Can you repeat it? And he can either try to repeat it or I can repeat it, and we'll definitely get it sorted out. So sorry about the glitch. It wouldn't be 2020 if online stuff was not giving us headaches. So continue.
Thank you so much. I hope the audio issue is resolving itself automatically. So far, it's been basically related to internet access, etc. But we do have an internet connection here in Chicago. It's a fiber. Usually that has not been the problem. But anyway, fun stuff. Yeah. So in terms of the cloud imaging area, of course, all this pandemic has escalated and forced the use of thinking in new ways that we haven't done before. Organizations in 2020 was basically asked to do the impossible and saying, yeah, we know we built entire infrastructure for doing everything when people actually were at the office, but now you can't do that anymore. So you have to change it, and you have to make it quickly. You have the entire weekend to do this. And that's basically where we have been the past few months, figuring out ways to change the way we deal with both deployment, but also managing the device after it has been deployed. So in terms of scenarios, obviously there will be machines that need to be reimaged or new machines coming in that needs to be a corporate image applied wherever that device is, either at home or at a remote office that has nothing but an internet connection. You can route back to the corporate office, or you can't use that VPN router because it's being currently choked, overwhelmed by traffic from thousands and thousands of users. You don't want to add imaging data on top of that link already. It could be things like, I know you, Michael, has been working a lot lately of using these type of technologies to rebuilding infrastructure when companies have been attacked, basically, and they don't have any infrastructure yet, but they need one.
No. And it's kind of, I wouldn't say depressing, but right now I'm in the middle of something. The customer that we are trying to salvage, because that's what it's all about. It's about salvaging things. They have locations all over the US and in Sweden and in Russia and in different locations. And every machine was infected by ransomware in less than an hour. So now we need to redeploy every machine everywhere. And yes, there is no backup. And no, they didn't have a deployment solution at all. So we don't have time to build a complete config manager environment. We don't have time to build out an Autopilot project either. We just don't have time to do anything. We need to be able to redeploy every client everywhere, including rebuilding all the servers, and try to get as much data back as possible through our recovery team and forensic teams. So the last 2 weeks, I've been spending on putting up PSD and validating so far about 40 different models. And I need to do everything remotely. I can't see the devices. I can't touch the devices. I have no idea about anything in the other end. And deploying machines across some kind of internet connection into a forest in Russia is an interesting project. But we use PSD for this. So we have this permanent solution set up as a recovery solution and a rebuild solution. So as long as we can nail down one IP address to allow access out from the network, we have the ability to redeploy the machines, and we either redeploy them into the domain or into Azure AD or into Intune or whatever, so we can put the machine under some kind of management. Without these kind of solutions, it wouldn't be possible. The other solution would be to ship all machines to one location and stick a DVD or a USB stick in each machine and manually install, download drivers and manually install all the applications, because there is nothing. It's so easy to say, well, we have a backup of this. Well, you don't. Ransomware attack means you don't have a backup. You're lucky if you have a backup. Most customers don't get lucky. They don't have a backup because that's the first thing they attack.
Especially not all the clients as well. How about the audio now, speaking of other things?
For me, it works perfect fine. Looks good, sounds good.
Perfect. I got a new headset, so
yeah.
Thank you, Amy.
But yeah. So having these kind of solutions prepared is more of, well, either you have it or somebody has it for you, because at the time you get struck by a ransomware attack, you're gone. And everybody has the same opinion. Well, we do have a backup. It doesn't happen to us, you know. And you heard that, Johan, right? No, we are good. We have a backup. We're using Azure. Yeah, no, all the customers so far also, they actually did have a backup in Azure. The first thing they did was to delete the Azure backup because they managed to get hand of the global admin account. So there was nothing left when they logged into the Azure portal. Everything was gone. It's like, what happened? We had all the backups here. Had is the correct expression. So
I think that is one. Also, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons to be able to do cloud deployment. And of course, there's other reasons. I mean, just being able to do things that you usually do on-prem when people are remote, they are home, you can run task sequences, you can modify them, you can access them. I mean, if I ask you, Johan, how many cloud management gateways have you configured the last year compared to the year before?
It has to be several 100% more. I was attending a session from Rob York and David James and Jason Giffens at the Ignite event they did online, and they said now that about 10% of their customers are running Cloud Management Gateway, which is quite a number because they have well over 80,000 customers. So that's a lot, and that's just escalated this year in terms of number of deployments, and also the functionality. And we'll talk about that more in detail later today. But what they have added in to allow imaging through those scenarios as well. But it's not just imaging machines when you get a new computer or as you said, when something happens to your infrastructure. It's also maintaining those images, servicing, and all those scenarios where companies often like to be able to run sequences for that particular task to get a little bit more control of the process. It's not the only option available, but it's a option available, and it's nice to be able to have that one when you do cloud imaging things as well. But then we have the whole concept of, all right, cool, we deploy a machine, we can do that from wherever we are in the world. And then we need to, of course, manage the machines after it has been deployed, either through Intune or for a config manager or for a combination of the both, etc. And if needs be, refresh the device or reset the device. So let's drill into a little bit more about those components that are kind of needed to be able to do imaging, because you need to have something to connect to. You need to have a way to actually do that connection and hopefully being able to transfer some content down. And I'm talking about applications, drivers, and images and all that stuff. And you need to have some sort of way of kind of see what's going on. So let's step by on the server side just for a little bit. In order for you to be able to do management or deployment, you need to have something in the back end that you can connect to. And that something is usually one or more of the items that I have on this list. So for example, when Michael was talking about his rebuild of a company that was attacked by ransomware, they actually spin up virtual machines in Azure, but they can be in any cloud provider. You can be the cloud provider too, because as long as you have internet access to that particular VM, it can be anywhere. But in this case, obviously, it didn't have any because their data center was like gone. So that's the benefit of Azure Amazon. It is always there. So you have a VM up there that runs the deployment server. You had use probably something to manage devices. That could be Microsoft Intune, it could be Cloud Management Gateway through Config Manager. And Windows Autopilot is kind of an interesting piece to the mix, I think, because Autopilot is not really deployment, is it? It's absolutely not deployment. It's just a very good technique to get machines under management. That's not the only way to get a machine under management, but it turned out that, and we will show this in detail, it turned out to be quite easy to actually automate the entire Autopilot process, including the upload and registration into Intune through the use of a sequence, optional web services to get additional security, and then that machine shows up nicely in Intune. And to do that type of automation, of course, the whole Azure AD environment with the Microsoft Graph automation platform in the backend is a key enabler for this. Yeah. So what do you run in Azure, Michael? When?
Right now, we are running a VM. Just a plain vanilla virtual machine. I think it's a D2 DS2 V2 or something like that, which works fine. However, since we are doing a bit of coding behind the PSD platform, the way it's constructed makes it possible to, in the future, use a CDN, a content delivery network. We haven't done so yet, but the thoughts we have is, well, maybe we could use things like BitTorrent and put that in, and maybe we can use a, different kind of network providers. So right now we either use the native one or we use the Bits ACP from 2 Pine Software. But in theory, we could put FTP in it and deploy from FTP, deploy from, I don't know. We need to do the Napster just because it's fun.
Is it all right if I just stick to HTTPS imaging, Michael? Will that be all right?
Yeah, so the way we do it right now is just a plain vanilla VM. We run either HTTP or HTTPS. It's a question of do you want it to be encrypted or not? We can, when we use HTTPS, do a bit of authentication. In general, most of the customers that we deploy right now then join the machine to the local domain. So it's only the deployment solution that is outside of the network, but yeah, we can just modify the task sequence and make it join Windows Autopilot at the end, or join the Intune directly, or have the user just end up with an Azure AD join, or whatever command you want to run in the end of the task sequence determines what happens with the VM, with the physical machine that is deployed. So that's the only thing we have right now. Could we run it in Amazon? Sure. Could we replicate it? Sure. Could we have multiple of these? Sure. Can we put a load balancer in front of it? Sure.
So I published a video last night on Twitter that got quite attention and got a lot of reactions and comments and feedback from people. And that one was especially, I just did like a 1 minute complete deployment from nothing to done and fully managed in Intune. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that process that would happen in the background. And what I have done in my environment is that in Azure, in Intune, I have created an application, a regular app registration in Intune, and I have granted that app the permissions that are needed in Microsoft Graph to deal with things like adding machines into user groups, to be able to log in unattended to the environment and to read and work with the Autopilot device objects that exist there. So bottom line, I have a few groups in Intune. I have an application that I use to authenticate against them. And during imaging, I simply use the Windows Autopilot module or info module that is available for download. It was written by Mr. Niehaus before he headed out and started a new journey on Titanium. But it allows a full automation of gathering the hardware ID from the device, upload it to Intune, and I decided to add it statically into the group because when I was doing a lot of deployment testing, I found that process much more reliable and faster. So I just have a PowerShell script that takes the device and adds it directly to the group as a static group. So I'm not using the group tags in Autopilot where you have a dynamic group that has to be waited to enumerate the device and eventually become available, because what I ended up having to do in the sequence was add in delays and checks. All right, are you ready? Not quite yet. Are you ready now? Not quite yet. And that was just difficult, I thought. So I went the static route instead because it guaranteed me results every single time. So if I break down that sequence just a little bit, see if I have this one up here. Where did you go, my friend? So this is a traditional deployment share. Michael is going to talk about that in more details, where I have my various sequences that I run through the imaging process. And at the time, it times to register the device in Intune. It's just a PowerShell script that runs. And the ways these PowerShell scripts run is that if I go to my Intune portal, and start to play around a little bit with for example, the groups that I have in Azure. Named that something clever.
By the way, we have two interesting questions, John.
Oh, yeah.
One says, so we can think about delivery mechanism in PSD similar to ACP in Config Manager.
Yes, that is we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few slides ahead, but yeah, content delivery is one key aspect of this, because you have to pay for the actual downloads, and whatever you can do to reduce that through clever use of caching and peer-to-peer capability, it reduces the overall cost to manage this. But so I have indeed some groups in Active Directory in Azure AD here. And if I go into my devices, go to the Windows enrollment piece here, where you have all the Autopilot stuff, I have created a few status pages for enrollment. I have created deployment profiles for Autopilot, and I have added a bunch of applications as well. In this case, just a few Win32 apps that I have available in the environment that I use for imaging. And these profiles, these applications, these status pages, and also configuration profiles in Intune, I simply assign them to one or more groups that I've created in Azure. Because during the imaging process, when I started a client, I modified the wizard so that let me start up on the boot media here that I have prepared.
A quick note about that. If you use the config manager, you use to collections. Everything is collections in config manager. I like that. Collection is based on whatever you want to base it on. If you use Active Directory, then you have group policies, and everything is based on basically group policies. Everything in Azure AD, that includes Intune, is based on groups. The only thing you have, good or bad, is groups. So if you want to apply deploy an application to a bunch of machines, you don't do that to a collection, you do it to a group. If you want to configure a profile, for Intune, you define that to a group. Everything is a group. So you need to remember that. And you also need to make sure that whomever is the Intune administrator has the permissions to create groups in Azure AD. Otherwise, this work is going to be hard. Well, he could be a global admin. Yeah, he could. No, he shouldn't. It's only one account that really should be a global admin account. So make sure that whomever is the Intune administrator or device manager in your Azure AD has the ability to create groups. Then it's going to work perfectly fine.
Was waiting for the connection to take place here to the VM in Azure. In the meantime, I can show you this. This is what it looks like after being connected, where you simply provide a computer name and you provide a group. This is a drop-down list. In this case, it's been hard-coded into the wizard, but it can also be automatically populated through a web service that just enumerates that list that I have there. Let's see if this one actually has internet access, because that kind of would. Yeah, it does. Always fun when you do live demos. What can possibly go wrong in a live demo? But while we're waiting for this one, the interesting part here, I think, is how do we actually start the deployment? So it's cool that we have stuff available on the server side, but we need to have some sort of interact with it to get the entire thing going. And in this case, I booted up a virtual machine from an ISO file, which works great in a lab environment and whatnot. But what if you don't really have that option? Well, first of all, you need to decide whether you want to allow or support both Wi-Fi or wired type connections. We have always been able to use USB sticks to jumpstart a deployment. That could be either MDT or Configmatic. But the thing with USB sticks, even if it's just the boot media, it still becomes obsolete at some point. It becomes old, drivers missing, just old binaries in it, whatever, in terms of config manager. And doing standalone data completely, it's kind of, they get old after a while, and you send them out to people. And what if you have 3,000 people? Who's going to copy out 3,000 USB sticks and send out? How fun is that on a scale? So anyway,
I can tell you all about that.
And I can select these options here that I had.
We currently have the customer we're working with right now. Yep, that's the case. I've been forced to do media updates 6 times over a week because they need modifications, and every time it's going to be the same argument. You need to download the new light touch ISO, you need to mount that, you need to create and update all your USB devices, and you also need to update the WIM file in your IPXC server. And even if I type that, send that, have a message, have a meeting, and have everybody verify that they done so, at least half of them didn't. Media is interesting if you only have one and never need to update it. Otherwise, it just is interesting.
Yeah, other options that we have now these days is modern hardware, like, for example, from HP. They actually now have directly in their BIOS in UEFI options for you to specify URL to download a link or a boot image directly over HTTPS. And Nathan with HP, he kindly made sure that we got a device we can actually try it out and show this this to you. So this is a 2-part process where you first have, through PowerShell, you actually have to prepare the device and feed that information into the BIOS, pretty much like you would do with any other type BIOS configuration, like enable TPM, enable UEFI, boot order, whatever. Just another PowerShell script, a fairly long one, I should say, to do that configuration. And once you have applied that payload to that device, now when you press F11, not F12, but F11 on that particular hardware, it will now go to that URL that you define in UEFI, eventually authenticate, and then download the boot image that way. And that way you don't need a USB stick at all. You just need to make sure that the device is somehow, either prior to being sent out there or after they have been sent out there, has been prepared for this using a PowerShell script. So I'm going to try to share a different application. I had a little bit of an interesting, when preparing for this demo.
The feature you're talking about, Johan, is the Firefly configuration, right?
Firefly, indeed, that was the hardware that I got a handle of. And that's just one of many HPs that have that capability. It's a platform they call Sure Recover. So let me see if I can swip.
And that's the idea. So HP is providing that functionality. So the ability for the company would be that they can recover machines using the HP service. Now, you can either use the HP service to do so, or you can have your own service that does other things, because they are just using plain vanilla boot from ISO or boot from an ISO over the
WinFile, yeah, in this case. So the hardware in the back end is using a flash device on the device itself. This one has 32 gigs, so it's pretty big. So I can actually, if I wanted to, also add the entire WIM file there. But in this case, I'm just downloading the boot WIM because I want to make sure that every time I do a deployment, the content is coming down fresh from the server. But can you see the screen okay? All right, so I'm using a Madewell Capture Express card that is connected to my HP, and I'm going to switch over to a different set of keyboard and mouse and try to restart this little friend here. It's going to flicker a little bit back and forth during the restart when it loses the signal and all that stuff, but shortly we should be able to see.
That looks like a TV from 1972.
Yeah, it's coming. Here we go. I'm pressing F11. You can see it's hard to see, but it's also entering factory recovery down in the left-hand corner. And it flips the screen again. Basically, the capture card does this every time it detects the change of screen resolution on the machine. I'll stop something, of course. That's also the possibility. Come on, yeah. There we go. So this way I can, if I select the local drive, it will now use the boot image that I already downloaded previously on the machine. And of course, that will be lightning fast. But the other option is select this one. It's now going to contact the URL that I specified and start to go ahead and download directly from my Azure VM an MDT boot image and initiate the process that way. And after it takes a few minutes because the UEFI network loader is simply very, very slow. But in the end, it just starts that light touch boot image over the network. And we also made changes to this UEFI loaders to actually tap into a remote PXC server as well. Has been fairly successful. So that's cool. But here you can see this is actually the MDT boot image coming down from Azure. Yeah, I'm not going to wait for this one because it will just show up exactly as it did in my virtual machine. But this is just how we can jumpstart a deployment. So I'll go back to my other screen for a second.
We have an interesting question.
John?
The interesting question is, how do you handle authentication credentials in a script that leverage graph during the sequence, directly or via a token, or leveraging a web services that does the heavy lifting with graph communication? Now,
when I did my testing at first, and I just wanted to make sure that it was working, it was actually a script that was run by the sequence itself during imaging that did all the lifting, and I have obfuscated the credential a little bit, so it wasn't very obvious what they were. But in a more like production type environment, I will just much rather send the hash up to the web service and the web service does the actual thing that I'm currently doing in my script. And I know that you, Michael, has been playing around heavily with a web service called REST-PS, which allows basically, it's a PowerShell script web service, so you don't have to develop anything in C# or unless you really want to. But that engine simply runs the script on your behalf, but it executes it on the server side rather than on the client side. So the only thing you need to send up or post to the web service would be the actual content of the hardware hash from the machine. And then that script on the server side does the necessary talk to Intune and give back a, yeah, you're ready to go to the sequence.
And the web services in itself is either protected by nothing or it's protected by a certificate. Yeah, so using a client certificate in the boot image means the boot image itself is authenticating. We also had another interesting question is, how do you protect the boot image? Well,
I'm happy you asked.
Yeah, the way we do it right now, it's two ways. You need credentials to access the boot image. And even if you have credentials to access the boot image, you also then need to authenticate when the deployment wizard runs. So there's actually two steps of authentication. Could we use the same name? Is it possible to improve that? Yeah, we could actually just use a client certificate. And then you need to have credentials to download the boot image, but then the boot image will use credentials to authenticate against the deployment share as well as the web service. In theory, we haven't done it yet. You could even put a PIN code on the certificate. So you really need to type a PIN code before the certificate is authorized to use something. So the way to make it secure using these kinds of solutions is easy, because we're just stealing the mechanism that is already used by other web services, appliance solutions, because it has been around for a long time. So doing the same thing with like UNC, that's tricky, but doing everything authenticated correctly in a long chain using HTTP, HTTPS, it's rather easy. We have the internal TrueSec forensics team spying on us on a regular occasion, and so far they haven't banned us, they haven't shot us, they haven't killed us. They go like, yeah, that's reasonable, because the only thing the image allows you to do is download the image. Everything else is then going to be user-based anyway. So yeah, you want to use Intune? Well, the user needs to authenticate. You want to use the Cloud Management Gateway? Well, the user needs to authenticate. So everybody needs to authenticate. So even if they can crack everything open, the only thing they get is a Windows device that runs for a couple of months.
An option that I've been playing around with quite a lot. I mean, I joined 2 Point Software about a year ago, and one of their platforms, one of the reasons for me to join them was, for example, they have an IPXC server, an IPXC implementation that being sold from that company. It's still open source and all that, but we were kind of hoping that organizations would talk to us because we know how it works very well and provide support and all that fun stuff of it. But IPXC have authentication built into the netboot file. So that's one step before the boot image is actually coming down. So in this particular environment, I have a few PCs that I deployed earlier, so they have some stuff already in them, but this is a brand new machine, and the only thing that exists on this particular infrastructure is my internet gateway that has the USB scope options configured. And those scope options simply tells this client where to go and get the netboot files from. So you can see it's connecting a remote IP address here. This is a VM in Azure running the IPXC server. So it will start to download the netboot files fairly shortly.
Yeah, the first time I saw this, I was laughing to myself because you always thought that PXC booting is just PXC booting. It turns out that PXC booting, well, it could be anything you want it to be. And in this case, you're still in the PXC ROM and poking around.
So the
You
boot image
don't
has
run
not yet
Windows.
even been downloaded. I still have to actually authenticate in this case against that particular server, but it can also be other type of credentials. It also depends on what you do with them on the server side. And let's see if I can remember the fairly long password.
Is it password 1 or password
No,
2?
it's longer than that.
Okay, damn.
And now it starts to download the boot image, and the content is actually coming from local peers because I had deployed a few machines before, and through branch cache, you can now get the content from those two peers instead of having to download from Intune and having to pay for that particular download. But of course, if this was the very first machine, then everything would have to come down over that peer. So that's one way of getting the deployment going, and then it's just going to boot up like it did before, so no difference there. It's just we are changing now from where we are getting the boot image. And then Andreas that I worked with, he actually went above and beyond this morning and recorded a little video of a project he's been hammering on, which I think is incredibly cool. So I'm just going to scrub through that video a little bit. It's a little bit hard to see here, but let's see if I can get it in focus. So this is a regular Lenovo ThinkPad something. And the only thing that is connected to it is Andreas' phone. So this one is connected to a USB cable, and the phone itself is using the Wi-Fi in his house. So the network cable is the USB cable to the phone. And that way you can actually boot directly into this and download the light touch WIM, the boot image over the phone, but having nothing else in the environment. You can be on a mountain somewhere, assuming you have some sort of connectivity on your phone, you can still image devices as you do on mountains often. But in this case, we are using the R&D's service in WIMP, so we can get the network driver going for the phone. But for the PC, this is just another internet or another network connection. And now it starts, I think, to become quite interesting because you can start to combine these technologies as well, where we now see that we have plenty of options to get deployment going. You just need to pick one that or a few that works for you. It's just that the recent additions of doing things like this, I think, is pretty cool because it opens up many more opportunities to start a deployment from anywhere.
Yeah, the way we are deploying the customer right now, they don't have this fancy stuff, but they are using they're using regular internet pucks. So they grab a bunch of computers, go to a conference room in the hotel, connect the puck, connect the cable, and boot on media and install the Windows devices. In one location, they are actually using they're using an iPhone connected to some kind of local hub switch on the desk. I didn't know that it existed, but the guy said, "Yeah, we do that for a couple of locations." So yeah, they are deploying. And right now, I think I just measured the number of machines. We're currently deploying about 100 machines at the same time globally. And some
the
of them
speed
over.
you get even from a phone these days is let's see here. Yeah, it's not like super speed, but it's not terrible either. You can still image device in, I don't know, half an hour ish.
Yeah, the average. I just looked at statistics for the current incident, and the average time is about 35 minutes.
Good stuff. All right, so we talked about the server side of things, the automation level that is required, the different ways to actually get stuff going. But then, of course, we have to worry about the content that comes down, because there are things you can do to speed up stuff. For example, when me and Michael started set up the whole PowerShell deployment kit, we learned pretty quickly that driver packages over HTTPS expanded to like 1,000 small files. Like, no, it took like 20 minutes to get down one driver package. And organizations that are starting to use PKI for the Configmatic implementations, or start to use deployment over Cloud Management Gateway, and starting to use various peer-to-peer techniques, they are doing the exact same thing. A package with 1,000 small files is not very effective to download on the internet in no way. So we started to archive drivers and applications, and we archive them either into zip files or the WIM files. WIM files in general, depending on your peer-to-peer technology, is like that tiny fraction better than zip files, but both of these scenarios will still give you a massive improvement compared to just trying to download
Yeah, and there's another benefit using WIM files as well. If it's a zip file, you need to extract it. If it's a WIM file, we need to mount it.
Yeah.
So in the other
Mounting
end,
quick.
Yeah, it takes just a few seconds to mount a WIM file. And in general, yeah, we do that for drivers. That's true, Johan. I also have a script that I haven't shown you, but we could do that for application as well. And it's the same story. We download the application that we need to install as a WIM file, mount the file, run the installer, and we're done. Means we don't need to copy, we don't need to do anything with it, and the transfer is more reliable. It's also faster.
We have some, especially Configmatic customers that have been working with the past 2 years, that they were already doing this for their largest set of applications.
Yeah.
Like they have the Adobe Suite that would have Autodesk, and that can be sort of 7, 8, 9 gigs in size with 30, 40, 50,000 small files. So what they would do, that they would just do WIM files on them, because not only does it shrink their size, it's just a single file. And as you said, you can just mount it on the client side instead of having to arc or expand it. So the technology has been in place for a long time, but the whole cloud imaging has sort of is driving and forcing that. So you actually can use the same technique even for smaller applications. Now, like the Note.++ application or WinMerge that I showed you before, I wouldn't even bother, because they're like 5, 6 megs in size. It doesn't really matter. But when you start to have applications that are several hundred megs and more in size, this is actually quite useful. Also, of course, reducing cost by using the various peer-to-peer technologies that are available. The one that I use mostly myself these days is obviously branch cache, since it's built into Windows. It's been around for quite some time, and it's supported for these type of scenarios. And always has been for HTTPS and HTTP type deployments. And to get them really, really reliable, of course, Bits is involved in the back end to drive this, and also to allow you to actually throttle some traffic should you need as well. The challenging thing, I think, has been branch caches. All the moving pieces is in the background. So the last year or so, I've been basically spending most of my waking or awake time by figuring out, by learning from Phil and Andreas, how this all plays together and how it can be used for cloud imaging deployments as well. For example, to get this to work into WinP, you need to download our toolkit so that you can add bits and branch cache into the boot image. Now, it comes in 2 flavors. We have a free version that everybody can use. It does the job it does to peer-to-peer. It just that it's a little bit throttle on speed and what it can actually achieve in terms of peering speed. But if your goal is just to reducing cost and you're doing cloud imaging, well, maybe the peer-to-peer speed in between devices is not the most critical piece. But of course, if you want that speed, you can acquire a license for the software that enables that. super speed switch. It's called Turbo. It's a fancy name, but bottom line is, if you don't want to, you don't have to, but you can still use this. Just go to the website, sign up, and you can download the stuff and play around with. Yeah. Final piece, I think, is also making sure that you can track the progress. So right now, we obviously have logging in the platforms, no matter what you do. And the MDT monitoring service, if you have that enabled, we can talk to that one too, so you can use that to follow your deployments wherever they are in the world. And I remember you, Michael, showed me yesterday one of your servers where you basically had clients in multiple countries. You can just see their how the imaging was going remotely in Azure through this option.
Yep. We also do another funky thing, and I'm going to show you that later, but we use the MDT database in a reversed way. That means that everything that is deployed gets inventoried into the to the database, which means that we can see things that it's interesting. So yeah, we get that information as well.
So I got a question on Twitter earlier regarding okay, so you have a sequence, how it's using Autopilot to make sure the machine comes under management. How does the technology actually work in the back end? And it's fairly easy, because what I have here is, let's see where I put that one. So I have an application that I mentioned in Intune that gives me the permissions I need. And during imaging, I'm reading in the secret that I tied to that application for permissions. And then I'm just using connect graph, that function, to connect to that one. I also connect to Azure AD prior to that. And then I'm running this script that basically is querying that specific group. In my sequence, this is just a variable that came from my deployment wizard here. When I was testing, I was just hard coding it in here, but you can see that this is a one-liner that does the job. As long as I've been authenticated and connected first, this one does it. And as we talked about before, you can take this one more step by putting this logic on the server side, and instead of running the gather on the actual device, you do only like this part. You just get the hardware hash from it, and then you upload that to the server, and you have a script on the server side that actually does the equivalent here.
Yeah, and there's another way to do this as well. I mean, this is the make the machine an autopilot device. There's also another scenario where you don't do this, which means it's going to be autopilot for existing devices. It's a flipped process. What you do is that you just put a JSON file in the task sequence. The machine will then believe it belongs to Autopilot. So it will automatically join Autopilot. But then you can automatically have a rule in Intune that says that everything that is joined into Azure AD as a device should be an Autopilot device. So that means that...
I played around a lot with that when it came all the way back in Configmatic when they added that in into the sequence. And while it worked, I just found that it was like hit and miss type scenarios, that sometimes it worked great because Intune would update that dynamic group very, very quickly, that JSON profile, put it into. Other days, it would simply not. So to get something that worked like every single time, this is what I had to do. And let's just say it does add about 5 minutes to the deployment process, because I had to actually get up the machine into fully Windows and upload the hash while in Windows, add it to the group, and verify that it was added to the group. And then it just better rebooted into Autopilot. So I lose about 5 minutes, but I can guarantee it works. And I'm too old for the may work. I like always
this is a more, yeah, this is a better process, because this will guarantee that it works as long as all the online web services working the way they're supposed to. But in general, the answer is yes, this is a more reliable process. The way we do
I
it
like
right
to
now
have
is
it in this sequence because I can get feedback from it. When you provision a JSON file into the Windows, whatever folder you put it in, the amount of information you get, it's just harder to troubleshoot, I thought. But yeah, it's there. Just one of those.
True, and this is the playing script because it's a demo. If you would like to use this in a more appropriate way, then you will just extract the hardware hash on the client, and then send it back to a web server, and the web services will then do the registration, and then you run another script that queries back to the web services, am I in the system? Do nothing until true.
Indeed. Just holding it. But that's just the process behind it. It's just a bit of PowerShell that takes the device, upload, make sure it's there, and then let go, and the machine becomes fully managed. So basically, F12, phone, USB, BIOS, walk away, you have a fully managed computer that you can log into and use. And that, I think, is the sort of key aspect of it. Any final question before we go to the break? Anything else that is popping up there?
We have a question, and the question is, are we using HTTP2 for compression?
We are not. This is just plain vanilla HTTPS. I have not seen. Is that Lars by any chance that asked that question? That's the only guy I know that actually plays around with this stuff. But HTTP2 stuff, I mean. But no, not yet. That standard is it's not yet available for this.
The thing is that HTTP2, if I understand correctly, and I read about it, it's compressing the headers, not the payload, and we are using payload, not headers. So
I'm not sure how that
going to be
works, and branch cache and all fun things, but no, the answer is no. All right, to get everybody a chance to get some coffee or food or whatever they need, or technical breaks, we're going to have a 15-minute break. I'm just going to flip over to a temporary slide here. And I'll see you guys in 15 minutes.